You know who nobody trusts is an addict. Well, addicts. No, even addicts don't trust addicts. Today we'll talk a little about addiction, my experience with it, and some mental frameworks around not only how to avoid addictions, how to overcome them, and why to just avoid things that are addicting like the plague, and how to get yourself out of them. Yeah, if you're caught in them. For those of you who know, I became a monk on my 18th birthday. Shaved my head, moved into a monastery up in Canada for a little time. I went to India for months and was a monk there. And then I spent half a decade traveling around the world, mostly about half the year in India, half the year in different monasteries in the West, and learning these Vedic arts and sciences. And one thing you do when you're a monk, believe it or not, is become completely sober of everything. Now, when I say sober, everyone has a different meaning of what that means. Like I live in Southern California, and if you tell someone you're sober, they're like, "Oh, cool. So you just, smoke the reefer." I'm like, "No, I don't smoke the reefer." It's like, "Oh, so like, what? Just beer?" I'm like, "No, just no intoxications." Even as a monk, you avoid caffeine. Like that, those things which are physically addictive substances, you avoid them. There's obviously other types of addictions that we'll talk about here, but specifically talking about the addictions that on substances and anything that you put into your body. So, yeah, most 18-year-olds, it's not the decision they make, but for better or for worse, that was the decision I made. And a lot of my friends, I was going to college at this point, and my friends were just like, "This is ridiculous. Why would you not want to smoke, drink, and do all the other things that make life seemingly manageable?" One of my best friends in the world, Abi Roberts, shout out to you. He makes this wonderful joke about sobriety and telling his friends, "I'm sober," and they say, "What do you do with your emotions? What do you do with your thoughts? You just have to sit there and deal with them." Anyway, it's a great skit. I'll have to tag it below. But the idea is like, what do you do with yourself if you don't have an escape like alcohol, like marijuana? You name it, whatever it might be. There's a long list nowadays of different types of intoxications. And it was actually a point of contention with some of my friends because, it's like, what you do? You get together, you drink. And it's like, come on, man, why are you being lame? Why are you not putting some toxic substances in your body? Intoxication. That's why we call it intoxication. You're literally putting toxins, poisons in your body, which stop your brain from being able to think and process properly. I've been vegetarian my whole entire life, and I just did it because, for obvious ethical reasons and whatnot. But as I grew up, I also realized, there's an addiction element there, even to eating animal flesh. There's such an addictive quality in terms of the hormones, in terms of what it does to the mind and the brain, just like similar to what might be there in, say, something like sugar. There's an addictive element, or other addictions like gambling. I was too young. I didn't really get enough into gambling. Probably would have, but and other addictions, sex addictions, whatnot. And those are really the four primary: substance, sex, food addictions, and then gambling addictions. And so when you become a monk, and even those who just practice bhakti yoga in general, you avoid those four types of addictions because no one trusts an addict. You'd never be like, hey addict, could you just take my credit card and run down the street, pull some money out and bring it? It's like, no one in the right mind would ever do such a thing. And so the reason I became sober of everything is because I was convinced thoroughly of the idea that it's far better to actually have some control of the senses. Do things that empower you to have control of the senses, and avoid things that disempower you to have control of the senses. Otherwise, you just become a slave to the mind. If you don't practice controlling your mind and your senses, you just become your mind's bitch. That's just what it is. You listen to your mind, and your mind takes you this way, that way, and the other, and it's just miserable. Don't do it. And so I would try to tell my friends, I would try to explain to them, like, you know what, the problem is you become dependent on the substance, and you need the substance for that dopamine hit and that release and that happiness. And I remember being in classes like anatomy, physiology, psychology, where we're learning basic aspects of neurocircuitry. And it's like, see, this is, we're learning like, okay, these substances have a particular effect on the mind. And it became a point of contention, like, oh man, you're not cool. Come on, man, you gotta drink, you gotta smoke, you gotta do all these things to be cool. And so pretty soon I was like, all right, this doesn't fly with me. And so I became kind of isolated, but that then propelled me to, on my 18th birthday, actually become a monk and move into a monastery and start to live that lifestyle. And what I learned pretty quickly, I started sobriety even before becoming a monk, but what I learned pretty quickly is that when you stop indulging with intoxication, you automatically get faced with all the issues of the mind that are otherwise being suppressed, repressed, or distracted by all these other substances. Now, keep in mind is the four primary types of addictions that we're referring to here, again, in terms of food addictions, substance addictions, intoxicants specifically we're referring to here, gambling addictions, and sexual addictions. These are some of the primary ones that are out there anyway. And the idea of avoiding them is you not only do you get to face the mind's actual demons per se, as they say, or what's actually happening in the mind without changing the mind with an artificial imposition from something outside. But you also get some freedom from the senses, because the challenge is every time you indulge with each of those addictive behaviors, you are now inclining yourself to take that behavior one more time. And then the second time you do it, you're now more inclined. And it's an exponential experience of the mind. It's not like, oh, I'll just do this one more time, then I can be done. No, every time you do it, it's a practice. Everything we do is a practice. So every time you say, okay, I'm just going to have one beer. Okay, you have now strengthened the muscle to have a beer. You have now strengthened the muscle to fill in the addiction. And living in the monastery, which is just like a spiritual frat house, in case you're wondering what it's like to live in a monastery. I mean, a couple differences between that and a frat house, but that's the idea. You're around a bunch of other dudes who are also into sobriety. And it's a lot easier when you're around them, but you also are faced to have to deal with everything that comes up. You don't have artificial escapes. So what happens is you start to find out what we might call a subtle escape is, as opposed to a gross escape, that which is tangible. You know, you take an intoxication, you eat a particular type of food, you release yourself sexually with someone else, you increase your dopamine levels by a particular type of game, casino match, whatever it might be. Casino match, just to see how familiar I am with gambling. And over time, you start to find where your mind goes in terms of subtle distractions. Because the gross ones, those are just obvious. They poison your mind, and then you can't think. It modulates your neuromodulators and your just think of it as chemical adjustments in such a way that you wind up becoming dependent on that thing to distract you from otherwise where your mind would go. And you then start to get faced with these subtle challenges. Now, what does that mean? That means things that happen within your mind in places that your mind goes to try to escape. Now, this is different for each and every psychology, but how else are you going to find it unless you sit there with yourself for some time? What to speak of then if you're meditating for an hour, 2 hours every day and talk about your mind wanting to run away? It's the most efficient way to find out what your actual challenges is. Sometimes challenges are. Sometimes people ask me, how can I expedite my ability to know what my core fears and wounds and challenges are, because that's one of the biggest things I deal with in helping people, is helping them figure out and identify, okay, what are your biggest stressors, the things that pull you outside of your center, your core, your alignment, your real highest self, your connected self. What are those things that pull you out? And then what are the things that can pull you back to center? And we must, in order to have a proper comprehensive understanding of one's psychology, you must know what those basic fears and wounds are that when get stimulated or triggered, pop one outside of their center, of their core self. And people ask, what's the easiest way to expedite that? And I say, sit down and meditate for a long period of time sober. You You want to go places in your mind. You want to see what your deepest, darkest challenges, secrets, magic, superpowers are. Sit down and shut up. Don't say anything, but just meditate. And if you're not familiar with the type of meditation that I'll be referring to, I typically always revert to mantra meditation as opposed to other forms because, I mean, there's so many types of meditations out there that can be very helpful, but mantra meditations, mentioned in all the ancient yoga literatures as the highest form because if you're just trying to negate the mind, good luck. It's not going to work. Watch. Let's try it together. We're going to do meditation. You ready? Take a deep breath. Okay. I want you to stop thinking at the count of 3. Just stop the mind. 1, 2, 3. You're done. Doesn't work. Why? Because the mind's active by nature. It doesn't work. Rather, we want to engage the mind instead of just trying to negate and shut down the mind. It's like trying to grab a wild animal and just contain it. It doesn't work. You gotta find a way to engage the wild animal or entertain the wild animal. And engage is a better word, but to give you an idea is entertain it in such a direction that will actually be beneficial. You just try to grab it. It's like good luck grabbing the mind. Similarly, though, there's a lot of things that you can focus your time and attention, your energy on, but that aren't necessarily going to be beneficial. So you could spend time, I mean, I don't have to give you examples. You guys know all the types of things you'd be spending your time and attention on that aren't necessarily beneficial. However, mantras, manasa in Sanskrit, trayate in Sanskrit means to free. So manasa means the mind, trayate means to deliver, to free. Mantra means to free the mind. And there's different mantras that we chant which focus our attention singularly. And the point of attention that we're placing our mind is on a spiritual sound vibration or sound vibrations that aren't material, sounds that aren't necessarily just going to make us happy or sad, but they're actually going to help us uncover the self. So anyway, we have a lot of other content based around mantra meditation. But the idea is that one sits without any substance. One sits and meditates for as long as you possibly can, and do that at least a couple times. And if you have a little notepad next to you, you could write down all the directions that the mind goes, and you'll start to see very quickly where your biggest challenges will come out just from doing something like that. So, I mean, everyone will agree if you could free yourself from substance addiction and vices, your life's going to become easier. But an added bonus is it's going to expedite introspection substantially if you're able to do that. What to speak of health? I mean, we could take the angle, which is, again, some of these are relatively obvious, and even a child could understand that, okay, if I drink motor oil, I'm going to have some serious negative side effects in the same way as if I were to drink alcohol or take different types of substances. I mean, all types of addictions, they drain your health. And even if not your physical health, your mental health. Now, one might then challenge and say, but what about using these substances in a controlled manner, in a way that you're not addicted? Yeah, it's like playing with fire. You know, whenever someone says, oh, I just have a drink here and there, I'm just like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. Like, it's just like, how would you feel if I said, yeah, every so often, I don't know, I gotta lick that doorknob. I don't do it often, but God, you ever see a doorknob? I'm a social doorknob licker, all right? I'm a social toilet bowl drinker. I don't drink out of all toilets. I just drink out of, when I'm with friends. It's just like, why? Why would you do such a nasty thing? Something that's just so toxic for your body. And the same, I just drink a little motor oil. That hits the spot, Makes my mind not think properly so I can pretend like life is a little bit easier for a few minutes. Yeah, it doesn't work very well. The challenge is you're playing with fire. You're doing these addictions. Yeah, I could just have a little sex. I could just have a little drug. I could just do a little gambling. Yeah, you are not that strong. Neither am I, neither is anyone else. No one is that strong. Until you've been able to control the mind, then maybe you have some more flexibility, but even then it's just, you're playing with fire. It's so dangerous. And why risk? This life is so short. I mean, you just die at any second. It's like, oh, okay, I'm dead. Why would you waste your time trying to play with some fire in such a way that, anyway, you get it. Another area of addiction is whenever you're spending your time doing things that are counterproductive to your goals in life, you must understand that you are strengthening that muscle. So the amount of time that you dedicate towards training the mind and saying, okay, mind, me, I, the soul, I'm your boss. Me, the real me, which you're not your mind. I hope you're relieved to hear that. I hope you're like, oh, thank God. You're not your body. You're not your mind. You're something divine. You're a soul. You're embodied. You're temporarily driving around a human body, aka a biomechanical robot. And to the extent that you tell the mind, okay, I, the real soul, I'm in charge here. You are not in charge. I'm the boss. You are becoming more comfortable and more practiced in doing that. Similarly, every time you say, okay, mind, whatever you like, you are becoming, that's right, the mind's bitch. And raise your hand if you want to be the mind's bitch. That's right. You didn't raise your hand. If you did, I don't know why you're listening to me. You're in the wrong place. Every time you practice that, you are now becoming a slave to your mind's desires. Now, that is a tough place to be, my friends. That is a place no one actually wants to be. So, my hope with sharing some of these concepts around addiction is to not only let you know there's tons of people doing it. It's actually, you can find tons of people. I mean, AA, NA, big fans of all that. The Bhakti community is arguably as beneficial, if not more, as any other community for sobriety that's out there. And finding those who are sober is just essential. And inevitably, life becomes a little bit easier because you're no longer running away from your issues and you're dealing with them. So you can actually become a whole person. You can actually grow, actually reach your potential. What to speak of uncovering your true nature, yourself, as opposed to just distracting yourself. And then on top of that, practicing actually controlling the mind so you can do what you want when you want. There's nothing worse than when your mind's like, I gotta do it. And you're like, all right, fine, I quit. Mind whatever you want. Ugh, that's just what human would say they'd want to do that? So, if you're struggling with any particular addictions, be that major or minor, be that smoking a little reefer, a little alcohol, some meth, some cocaine, some heroin, whatever it might be in terms of substances. If you're struggling with gambling, now that could be some online poker, that could be hitting the slots, that could be buying some lotto tickets. Struggling with food addictions, especially meat, don't kill living entities. It's not necessary. You do fine. Never had a piece of meat in my life. Doing stellar. You don't need it. You can find every excuse in the world to stop eating meat. What to speak of all the other addictions that are out there with food, like sugar. I mean, sugar's not even vegetarian, by the way. It's like white. There are obviously vegetarian sugars, but white refined sugar nowadays. A lot of the sugar that's in all this junk it's not even vegetarian. Different types of food addictions, and I mean, you name it. There's just so many. Processed food, whatever it might be, or sex addictions, sex, masturbation, pornography, all these things, which there's 100% chance these things are going to take you down. And if you're struggling with them, all you got to do is reach out. I would say something like, comment below. If you're struggling with now, don't do that. Just drop us a private message. We'll give you tons of resources because you can do it alone. It's just harder. There's no need to do it alone because there's enough of us that can help support you overcoming addictions. And I can tell you it's one of the best decisions I've ever made in my entire life is just becoming free of addictions. Now, you might be hearing this and say, oh, but Madhu, anything could become it. Yeah, don't be weird. Shush. Like, stop being so weird. I'm weird. You could be weird, but like, don't be such a contrarian. You understand my point. You know what I'm talking about. Once you deal with these big addictions, these kind of gross, right in your face ones, then we can start getting into some of these other subtle addictions. Everything from greed and envy to anger. Wait, what? Addiction, anger? Yeah, that's right. There's various types of tastes we develop for different types of subtle addictions. We'll get into that another time. But whatever areas of your life that you're finding yourself becoming a slave to the mind, you have full permission to overcome them. And how can you do it? all alone, close your ears, don't listen to anyone else, don't get any help from anyone, try to just, no. That sucks. Don't do that. Get some help. And there's plenty of resources out there. If you don't have them, just reach out to me, and I'm happy to share some with you. And live the life that you want to live. Be free. Be free. Don't be a slave to the mind. I just one sip. Ugh, really? One sip? It ain't no one sip. There ain't no just one sip. Live a clean, free life. You'll thank yourself for it in 1 year, 10 years, 5 years, 30 years, for the rest of your life. And then you can help someone else do it too. Talk soon.